Hey, good morning, and welcome back to Psychology and specifically Motivation with Dr. Samuel Taylor. So, continuing on our discussions we've been having around motivation, we've talked about Hertzberger two-factor theory and how that applies to creating psychological contract. We've talked about the idea of arousal theory and drive reduction theory. And we started this discussion on this basic idea of motivation being the driving force that moves us in a direction, right? And I say it that way a little bit differently than many textbooks because what we've already dispelled then is this idea that people are unmotivated, right? So we look at this idea and way too often people go, oh, that person's way unmotivated, or this person is unmotivated, my cousin, my brother, my sister, whatever. And the challenge is that really they're not unmotivated, they're just motivated in a different direction than you are, right? So, or a different direction than what you think they should be. So now we're going to take Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which we've talked about before, and we're going to apply it to the work setting. Because I can venture to guess that any of us can tell a story or recall in our mind when we were on a job, or we're on a job now even as either a coworker or as a supervisor, and looking at someone and trying to understand what motivates them, or better yet, one of the questions I constantly receive as an IO practitioner in my private practice is, how can I motivate my employees? And as a humanist, I come back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs because Maslow gave us some really great ideas, right? So if we just come back and look at his very first version, we know there's a 1969b, right? Ends with the self-transcendence at the very top. But I'm going to stick with the old version right now. And Maslow gave us this version of the hierarchy of needs in the early 1950s. And he said, here's basically how human needs work. And so this is what motivates people, right? So very first at the bottom is we have those physiological needs, okay? Those are all of our biological functions that we would need for survival according to evolutionary theorists, all right? And I'll talk about that a little more in detail in just a second. And then we have this idea of security, right? So we want to have security, and then we move to love and belongingness, and then esteem, and finally self-actualization at the very top. It's a really pretty diagram, and I always joke, right? Give a psychologist any theory and we'll put it in a pyramid. We love pyramids, right? I mean, it's just what we do. But you know, honestly, you look at it and you go, well, it's really pretty and it sounds nice. And as we talk about it in class, it seems like a really good idea and it seems highly relevant. But the question really becomes, is it much more than theory? So is Maslow's framework actually practical when we start talking about motivating employees, for instance? And if so, then how does it apply to the workplace? And I would just say this, on any theory that I teach, if it's not applicable, in other words, if I can't apply it, then it's just a catchphrase, right? So it's the phrase of the day, and we have way too many phrases of the day out there in business world today. So I want to make sure that we actually talk about how we can apply theories, and so that's what we're doing here. So let's go through and look at each level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs and see how Maslow explained it, and then how we can fulfill that in the workplace, or how your employer can fulfill it in the workplace, right? So first we look at the very basic level being physiological needs. Again, this is that evolutionary survival. So we have to be able to breathe. We need food. We need water. We need sex. We need sleep. We need to maintain homeostasis in our bodies, and we need to be able to excrete, all right? So those are the basics. That's what Maslow had put in here, and he said these are all the things that have to happen. Now, not all of these things do the employer meet. Or does the employer meet? But pretty much all of them they can, right? And how do they actually apply it? Well, first, when we start thinking about sleep, we could substitute the idea of rest, right? And so here we need to look at rest breaks, right? So when it comes to food, it's about lunch breaks. It's also really when we start thinking about all of these other issues, right? Food and water and, you know, maintaining homeostasis and all these different factors that we have in life, it comes down to the living wage idea, right? So, and I say living wage a little tongue-in-cheek because a lot of different parts of the country use that term differently. I say living wage in this, there has to be enough wage that it's sufficient for the employee to purchase the basic needs, the essentials of life, right? So if the wage is good enough and the breaks are there, then we've met the physiological needs of the employee, right? So once we've met the physiological needs, we move on to security needs. And when we look at the security needs here, what we see is Maslow said we need security of our body, we need security of our employment. So we need to perceive some form of stability, in other words, right? In our employment, in our resources, in our family. We even want to see stability in our health, right? And in our property. Now, that's kind of a difficult thing to do, but it really is how we meet this level. And it's not to say that when you're at this level that, security is met, that you have no doubts whatsoever and everything is perfect and nothing can happen. It's just that you believe things are fairly stable, right? You're not anxious, spending all of your time worrying about them. So how do we meet that from the employer side? Well, we provide a safe work environment. I mean, that's one of the very fundamental, most important things that we do. Again, go back to Hertzberg two-factor theory we've already talked about. This is one of the hygiene factors, right? So it's not even a motivator. It's just expected by the employee in the psychological contract. You're going to provide a safe place, and that safe place is going to be free from threats and intimidation. That's from coworkers, customers, supervisors, anyone, right? Vendors, etc. It should be free from threat and intimidation, and there should be relative job security. People don't want to go to work, and they're not going to be motivated at work if they're constantly wondering if they're going to have a job the next day, right? So, and I think many of us have been there in life. I know I have. I mean, I can recall in younger years going in and being just miserable, wondering, I mean, who's getting fired today, or is this place going to be around the next day? I mean, that kind of thing, and there's no motivation there. All right, so if we provide the safe environment, we provide some form of relative job security, and we keep people free from threats and intimidation, then we move on to love and belongingness. Now, some of this immediately falls into Title IX sexual harassment, so let's not go there, all right? But let's understand, Maslow did say social needs, friendship, family, and sexual intimacy are all parts of love and belonging, okay? And this is a whole different level when we talk about, Maslow's idea of sex versus sexual intimacy. And I separate those out because obviously many people would go, well, work can't fulfill that. Don't do that. Yeah, that's true. And yet, if you think about it, right, well, it's not fulfilled right there in the workplace. It is fulfilled through work. And it's fulfilled through work because when people have purpose, when people have meaning, when they're motivated, when they have their other, underlying needs met, they can focus on this outside of work too, right? So it's important that work not look at just what I provide here, but what do I provide here and how does that impact out here for the employee becomes a factor, all right? So here we say, all right, basically we have in the workplace a need to create a feeling of acceptance. Every human being wants to be accepted. I always hear this from people, oh, I'm alone or I don't need anyone. No. All right, social belongingness theory absolutely says people do need people. And there's only 2% of the population that actually does not need anybody else. And they have a mental disorder, right? So, I mean, that's the reality of it. So normal, healthy, psychologically adjusted individuals have a need of acceptance and belonging. And so what we do is we make sure and create community, and we reinforce team dynamics, and we reinforce partnerships, we reinforce working together, right? And we do that through all sorts of different ways. I mean, think about how you can reinforce your team structure, or for that matter, think about how you could just reinforce your appreciation of how the team does things, right? The simple thing is a supervisor bringing in donuts once a week or buying pizza once a month and things like this. So, of course, now under the tax code, be careful, all right? But anyway, that's another one. Those of you supervisors get what I'm saying. All right. Here we go. Next, we look at esteem. All right. So in esteem, Maslow said we need self-esteem, we need confidence, achievement, we need the respect of others. But we also need to be respected by others, right? So we need to respect other people, but we also need to be respected. So we need a mutual relationship there. And so how do we do that? Well, we recognize achievements, right? So I can tell story after story of organizations I've gone into, but one private college I remember was suffering from horrible employee turnover. And one of the things I introduced was what we called the Golden Mouse Award, right? Because it was primarily computer-oriented private college. And it was the Golden Mouse Award for Outstanding Instructor of the Month. And those little things like that, recognizing achievements, recognizing what employees do well, really goes a long way. I mean, it does. And it seems, the gold star idea on the paper seems cheesy to some people, but the truth of the matter is, human beings like reinforcement like that. They really do, even when they pretend they don't. Okay. The other things we can do: assign important projects to people, provide status to make employees feel appreciated and valued. Right. So I've seen many a time, and I don't recommend using title to replace raises or promotions or things like this, but I've seen title changes that really change a person's mindset as to what they're doing and how their job is going and how they're viewed by their employer even, right? So, look at this and make sure that you're showing your employees they're valued. It helps build their esteem. Now, if we build their esteem, we've met all these other needs, we get up to the very top, we look at self-actualization, and this is the trickiest one because Maslow said, here's what it's really about. It's about truth, justice, wisdom, meaning, morality, creativity, spontaneity, problem solving, lack of prejudice, acceptance of facts, acceptance of self, finding purpose, etc. I mean, it's all these different things I can put in there, and you can see I can't get them all there, right? And I could go on and on with that. But the reality is what Maslow's saying here is people want to see the world as just. They want to see their place in the world, and they want to believe that people are moral around them, and they want to be moral. So what do we do to encourage this? Well, we give people challenging, meaningful work. Here's the thing. We give people purpose, right? So often, I say that a person's vocation is not their calling, but really we can give them purpose in their vocation anyway, all right? Even if it's not their calling in life, we can give them purpose. So we need to remember that and do things that enable innovation and creativity. All right, so that's a quick demonstration of Maslow's hierarchy as it applies to the workplace. Here's the summary, all right? So when we look at this, here's what we did. We went through, we looked at the levels of Maslow, we looked at what Maslow said, and then we looked at how they apply to the workplace. In the very end, here's what matters. What do you do in order to keep yourself motivated? What do you do to motivate the employees around you? And if you are in a supervisory role, how can you actually do a better job in applying Maslow's hierarchy of needs to help your employees be the best that they can be?